we come to you for a horror story, a tale that should chill you to your very core. What if 2000 AD never existed?
Ah, I
Dun,
like that.
dun, dun. Yes, on this episode of In Orbit Every Wednesday Earthlets, we are talking counterfactuals because I was in the pub and had a brain fart about what we should talk about on the podcast. Um, yeah, for the first, kind of the first time, we're going to explore not necessarily the impact of something, but what would have happened if that thing, what was the impact if that thing had never existed. Um, and you can tell by Chloe's face that she's either I don't know. I don't what are the options here?
I I have mixed reactions. I do not I am very much a live in the present person, so this is just giving me, like, anxiety. I'm like, I've worked so hard to work through the anxiety of not worrying about things that hadn't ever happened, and now you're like, "What if we do an entire episode on it?"
Welcome to In Orbit Every Wednesday, athletes.
Get 2000 AD now. Get to.
Borag Thung Earthlets, and welcome to the anxiety-inducing In Orbit Every Wednesday. I am your perfectly rational and calm host, Molch-R, and this is your little bundle of nerves, Chloe. And on this episode, we're going to be talking the counterfactual of what would have happened if 2000 AD had never existed. What if in 1977, Earthlets everywhere had turned up to the local newsagents and found
Nothing.
everything else apart from the galaxy's greatest comic?
Yeah. It's a really broad one. I feel like for the
Mm.
first counterfactual, you were like, "What if we do the broadest one that we
Yeah,
can?"
yeah,
Out
yeah,
of
yeah.
all of the list that you sent me when you were a couple pints in, you were like, let's go full hog with it."
Well, I think I think it's key to to avoid repeating ourselves when we do these because we're only going to do them occasionally, But to avoid repeating ourselves, you go with the broad one first, and then you narrow it down, through other things. So, undoubtedly, we'll do what if um, uh, Wagner and Ascara hadn't returned to Judge Dredd? What if, to well, yeah, we'll come on to other stuff. But what if Alan Moore hadn't been plucked out of the slush pile by Alan Grant? You know,
Yep. We'll
so
we'll get there. So let's see, that seems so counterintuitive to me where I'm like, "No, you go niche first and then you go broad." But I guess you make sense. You're the smart one.
I don't. No, 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 no.
Two halves of a
Um,
whole brain, we're gonna stick to that. So, I wanna hear your first reaction to the idea of it's 1977, it's not there. Like, what is the first thing that you thought of when kind of brainstorming for this?
um, my initial thought was that old. Is it I can't remember who it's paraphrasing, but if 2000 AD did not exist, it would be necessary to invent it. That kind of the in many ways, 2000
Uh,
AD is the culmination of lots of pressures and ideas and personalities that were all coming together. As explained in Spell Power Overload, um, Judge Dredd, the Mega History, uh, Pat Mills, Be Pure, Be Vigilant, Behave.
I Am the
Um,
Law by Michael Molcher.
well, I said I wasn't going to mention that, but um, everything that had happened with battle and with action, the commercial pressures that were on IPC at the time, the personalities involved, the likelihood of something very much like 2000 AD, not appearing, are very, very small in that
Mhm.
context. However, my initial reaction to the to the notion is one of horror because, of course, um, and this is a very mainstream perspective. 2000 AD is the survivor. When it started, the comic book industry was still very, very healthy, selling hundreds of thousand copies every week,
Mhm.
dozens and dozens of titles, not just from IPC and DC Thompson, but also other publishers as well. Marvel had started doing reprints of material and had kind of had started doing Captain Britain
Mhm.
in the 1970s.
1970.
Um, so the fact that in many respects it's the last comic standing of that industry. That is not to say it is all that is left of comics, because comics have gone on to be so much broader and so
Sure,
much
sure.
bigger and so much more vibrant. Um, but you've got this holdout, this weekly comic, which in of itself is incredible that it continues in the format that it has.
Yeah.
Um, and I think really for me the most obvious horror is the ripples in the pond. You know what wouldn't be affected.
Yeah. Well, because 2080, like, much to a lot of people's surprise, I think, especially people that aren't even necessarily aware of like all of this history behind the comic. It really is the cornerstone for so much stuff that people just, and there's so much influence
Mm.
behind comics that, you know, otherwise may not have had that influence, and so the comics that we do know, even if they got created, may have looked very different.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's important to point, because there'll be lots of fingers wagging in the air at this point. Um, just because 2000 AD in this scenario didn't exist, obviously it wouldn't mean that the people who grew to fame to its pages wouldn't want to work in comics, wouldn't continue to make comics, wouldn't go on to illustrious careers. Um, but the shape of them would be very different.
Well, that you keep bringing up the thing that I thought of, and I thought I was so clever, and I'm not. The, my first thought was, I wonder if the quote unquote British invasion would have happened at all.
Well, right. Now
Ah.
that's really interesting, because of course 2000 AD was not alone
Yes, of course, but
in the
would it
late
have happened on the scale that it did?
70s. Well, what do you think, Chloe? What do you think?
I would that's I think that it would have I think that it probably would have still happened. I don't think that it would have happened on the scale that it did.
Mm,
I also like, because so many of the creators that ended up coming over and hitting it big, so to speak, in the American comic scene, um, I have no doubt in my mind, because they are the powerhouses that they are, that they would have, like you said, still had very illustrious, successful careers in British comics, in through various other publishers, had 2000 AD not existed. But I don't think that they would have necessarily had the uh I hate using this phrase, it's so dumb, but the freedom of expression to
mm,
really put their, their whole ass into it. I was doing so well. Um, I don't think that they would have been to really put their whole creative drive into it in the way that they were able to in 2000
mm,
AD. And so maybe they would have come over and been put on different books, because, people didn't recognize, their commitment to this particular genre. Maybe fewer creators, or
mm.
creators would have just stuck to British comics. this is what makes the counterpoint thing so hard is that all of this speculation, you know, it's diving down a wormhole. We're never gonna know. But the idea of it happening, I'm like, there's especially because, like, the 2000 AD is the people who create it,
Mm,
and who knows what those people would have or could have done had this not been around,
mm.
you
Well,
know? But
I mean, the obvious example, you know, is John Wagner,
yeah, I'm like,
who
would he have just, like, ended up back at DC Thompson?
well, because of course he took that substantial break from comics,
Mhm,
after, was it after, Valiant folded?
mhm.
Where he went up to be a groundskeeper of a stately home in Scotland and, was in the pub and somebody came and nicked all the lead off the roof. Um, and him and Alan Grant, like, paddling out into the middle of the estuary and, nearly dying. But, so it was never a given that John Wagner would have continued in comics.
Sure.
Because they and DC Thompson was a very varied publisher as well. So,
Mhm.
both John and Alan Grant had worked as sub-editors. Um, with somebody like Pat Mills and just the energy of Pat Mills.
I have a theory about Pat Mills.
Go on.
I think Pat Mills would have gone into TV, and I think Pat Mills would have taken over Doctor Who. That's
Wow.
my theory. Like,
Wow.
I think that there would have been, like, in this weird hypothetical, I think there would have been a hard pivot, and I think that Pat Mills would just be, like, the Doctor Who guy.
For how long?
Mm. Is this, like, what I want or what would probably have happened?
Well, I'm just um, what's his, what was the producer called? John.
It's always a John.
Yeah. Thank God for the internet. John Nathan Turner. Essentially, you see Pat Mills becoming the John Nathan Turner.
Basically,
Wow.
yeah. In this particular section of the wormhole, I think that Pat Mills becomes, like, the Doctor Who guy. I think Pat
Um,
Mills kind of wanted that by a reality to
oh,
happen too.
that is a hell of an intriguing shout, and I can absolutely see it. Because that energy, that creative energy, absolutely, particularly at like the BBC in the 1980s, you
Mhm.
could 100% see him fitting in there.
Yeah. I think that I Pat, if you're listening to this, please don't take me too seriously, but I think that Pat Mills actually has the personality for television, particularly around that era. It kind of would have just fit perfectly. So I'm like, well, Pat would have been set.
Yeah. Yeah. And I it's yeah, I mean, you've kinda hit me for 6 with that one, really. Um,
Sorry.
no, I mean, it's so intriguing a thought, but you're entirely right, because 2000 AD comes out of such a, as I said, such a particular set of circumstances. So you could almost say, well, if action hadn't been effectively banned in 1976,
Mhm.
would 2000 AD have been what it was? It was already in development when Action, what was it, 33 or something, was pulled from shelves. Um, and John Sanders was very much, we got to prove these bastards wrong. You
Yeah.
know, these morality campaigners like Mary Whitehouse, we've got to prove them wrong. Um, so again, the circumstances kind of ensure that something was going to happen. But you
Yes.
take Pat Mills out of that equation, and 2000 AD is a very different beast. And then you've got 18 months, a year, 18 months of
Mhm.
Pat, and then Kelvin Gosnell, as editor, continuing that legacy. And then there is I can't remember exactly where I'd pegged the change previously, but it's kind of when Steve McManus takes over, by and
Mhm.
large, that you know, he inherits a pretty healthy creative roster at that point. Um, that 2000 AD begins to not evolve beyond Pat Mills, but certainly take on a life of its own. So you know,
Yeah.
it's not requiring that kind of um, almost apocalyptic energy that,
Mhm.
that he brought to the project. So you know, if 2000 AD didn't exist, something like it would exist. But because the circumstances were so specific, it wouldn't be 2000 AD, and I don't think it would have lasted that long because it required that angry burst of energy.
Yes. Well, it required a certain level of impatience.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah, it's like, "No,
100%.
this is happening right now. I
Yeah,
want
yeah,
it to happen right now," which is also adds, honestly, to my reason behind why I don't think that Pat Mills would have been, like would have been taken out of the equation of it,
mm,
which is I think that Pat, for all of his amazing creative energy, is a very impatient creator,
mm,
and, uh, I think that if something hadn't come along, there would have been an alternative route.
mm, mm. Absolutely, and it I think it one of the reasons why I want to do this as a counterfactual is because it is very easy to become complacent
Oh, yeah.
about things. Um, and particularly something like for the 2018, you know, next year it's celebrating its 50th anniversary.
Yay.
50 years. Like there are so few periodicals that
Mhm.
exist for that long.
Well, especially existing in the same way for the whole
Exactly.
time.
Exactly. And you know, one by one, its stablemates and its competitors fell by the wayside. You know, even you know, the Dandy closed down a few years
Mhm.
ago. The Beano's been through various revamps over its history, um, and has had to. And 2000 AD has had to change as well. The most obvious one being that in around about 1990, it decided to start growing up with its readership. That it was,
Yes.
you know,
It's not
effectively,
solely for teens anymore.
yeah, well, it effectively abandoned the idea that kids would continue reading it. Of course, kids did continue reading it,
Yes.
but that was no longer part of the mission statement. And so, you know, it's very easy to go, well, of course it was going to survive. But then you look at, you know, it was nearly cancelled. In the
Mhm.
early 80s, there was the printer strike in the early 80s as well. And it wasn't a given that it would emerge from that as a going concern. Um, there's been various points, particularly in the 1990s. You know, let's be brutally honest. Egmont, who were the Danish company who owned it, who had absorbed Fleetway,
Mhm.
um, they didn't really, well, they didn't know what to do with it because it was so different from everything else they published. Again, it was so singular
Yeah.
that Egmont had basically wanted the Disney licenses that
Yeah.
Fleetway
It
had.
wanted
So
to be the IP farm.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So you know, it ends up with this weirdly idiosyncratic comic with like a staff of two.
Mhm.
Um, and so there, you know, there is a scenario in which it didn't survive that period.
Well, let's face it, that could have easily happened.
Yeah.
There are so many points over the past 49 years where, for all intents and purposes, 2080 should have stopped. And I
Mm.
don't say should have as in that's something that I want, but should have stopped in that, like, all of the odds have been against it.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
you
the
were bet against it surviving in
the
those
the
situations.
the continuation of it for this long is kind of unfounded,
Mm.
and thank God that it has, but that's why this theory is so hard to work through because it's just like, okay, but there are so many alternate timelines where it probably did,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And also looking back on it now, it's difficult to do as a counterfactual because it is so sewn into the history of comics, and
Yeah.
let's call them Western mainstream comics for want of a
Mhm.
better phrase, and has had an oversized impact on that industry. Because this one of the things I think I've said before quite brazenly. No 2000 AD, no Vertigo.
I would largely agree with that.
Because it's not that the creators wouldn't be there and still be very talented and want to work in comics. It's just it was that British invasion that had already happened. You got Alan Moore, Dave Gibbons,
Mhm.
um, you'd Brian Bolland, obviously.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
uh,
and
go on.
well, when you say that too, it does come down to, the thing that I always come back to with the British invasion, uh, and 2000 AD being having been such a cornerstone building block for that is and that being a building block for Vertigo, was that I feel like I said it before, 2000 AD and British comics culture in general has always had a gift for embracing the weird and embracing abstract thought and embracing bizarre, like just leaning into bizarre stories and leaning into camp and leaning into a very specific kind like flavor of dystopia. And I feel like if that had not come along, then Vertigo simply wouldn't have existed, because I don't know if American comics would have ever fully, like, full-chested embraced
Mm.
weirdness in the
And
same way.
and even then, an awful lot of Vertigo was not even as weird as British comics in
Yeah,
2000 AD could be. Like
yeah.
a lot of the sharp corners were filed off in
Mhm.
order for it to work for an American
For it to
audience.
be more palatable in general.
Yeah,
For
and without 1990s Vertigo, a whole
Mhm,
slew of careers would look very, very different. Um, without and without that, you don't get Image as it became.
yeah.
Because initially Image was very much an American an
Oh,
American
yeah,
publishing company.
like, painfully so.
Yeah, but it later evolved to be, something different in tone and content.
Mhm.
Um, the impact on, uh, movies
Yep.
would be nowhere near as great as it was. So, so much of the Marvel Cinematic Universe riffed off the work of British writers who had, several of them had worked in for 2000 AD at the beginning of their careers. Um, no Ultimates, no new X-Men, um,
Mhm.
and most fundamentally, in all likelihood,
Mhm.
would there have been a Watchman?
Oh, you're treading
Because
in dangerous territory.
this is a point I wanted to raise it very specifically, and I mentioned it earlier. 2000 AD was not alone. In 1982, Deadskin launched Warrior,
Mhm.
in which you've got Marvel Man slash Miracle Man.
Yeah.
You've got V for Vendetta.
Yep.
So, two of Alan Moore's greatest works, arguably much better known than anything he did for 2000 AD,
Yeah.
which is, in of itself, ironic, though, of course, they were then specifically, V for Vendetta was then, put into a graphic novel by DC,
Yes.
uh, went from there. But Warrior is interesting because it provided that additional space for certain characters, and Steve Dillon,
Yeah.
you know,
God.
yes, he worked on Judge Dredd and Rogue Trooper for 2000 AD, but he did Axel Pressbutton
Yeah, he
in
did.
Warrior.
That's one of my favorite books.
So
That's one of my favorite series. What a great concept Axel Press Button
so,
is.
because my point is things would look very, very different, not necessarily completely different. But without 2000 AD, you would be removing the spirit of the British invasion more than
Yeah,
anything, I think.
yeah. Well, I think that the sci-fi landscape, sci-fi specifically, the
Mm,
sci-fi landscape in comics would look ultimately very, very, very different, period. Um, but I see, you know how I've been telling you you need to learn to big yourself up more? That's kinda how I feel about, like, you're like, "I'm not saying that would change entirely." I am. I'm saying it would change entirely because then I mean, it's a domino effect, right?
mm, mm,
If you say, "Well, the British invasion didn't happen," and what if, like, what if Watchmen didn't happen? Yeah, and then you wouldn't get this very specific period of DC Comics history, which then you had so many other comics that basically answered to it. I think of if DC didn't have that, dark, gritty period where, it was like kids aren't for there was an actual like logo that was in the comics. It was like DC Comics aren't just for kids or
mm.
some if you didn't have that period, would we have had Deadline? Which was almost the counter argument to that, which was like, yeah, maybe not, but we're here to fuck around and make it goofy. It's an entire domino effect, and if with 2000 AD being such a structured point of
Mm.
all of it, fuck it, if 2000 AD didn't exist, then you would all be screwed. It's like, I I have that kind of confidence in it.
Well,
I think that it is responsible for some of the greatest creators and
mm,
people influenced by the greatest creators that then also became great creators. Like, it's the thing of, like, great art comes from observing and absorbing great art.
yeah.
And so many of these powerhouses of comics found themselves absorbing 2000 AD, and you cannot tell me that that was not, like, a critical springboard,
Mm.
that if it wasn't there, everyone would just fall flat,
And,
at least in some way or another.
when you've got people like Christopher Nolan talking about, reading 2000 AD, I know.
Yeah.
You go, well, the wider impact on culture would have been just wouldn't have been there from
Mhm.
that one thing. And yeah, yes, those people aren't all about 2000. It's part of a broad
Sure.
spectrum of stuff that they consume. But the brand of dark humor, you know the use of political satire,
Mhm.
the way that 2000 AD dealt with violence, and all that, like that wouldn't necessarily be there. We wouldn't have RoboCop,
Yeah, exactly.
you know, because and
This is
again,
the second
not
episode where
fingers
we're
in the air,
passively
wagging away,
mentioning Paul Verhoeven.
disagree me with on this, but in in all likelihood, Verhoeven was looking for the Dread license, which was
That's
and
what and then that went down the toilet, and so he decided instead to do a lot of coke, and, and he was like, "Screw it, I'll make my own Judge Dredd with hookers and blackjack," It's it's all it's it all comes together. It all comes back to 2000 AD.
yeah, yeah. And like I said, it's easy to become complacent about the existence of something.
Mhm.
And so sometimes it is useful to say, well, what if this thing wasn't right? What if it had failed?
Sure.
As many people expected it, some people wanted it to go under, and in many ways, thank God, rebellion came along at exactly the moment that it did, um, because the likelihood of 2000 AD having survived into the 21st century, well, the odds were getting worse and worse and worse.
Mhm.
Um, and that was, bloody hell, 26 years ago.
Um Oh, kind of. Also, I feel like what you just said kind of ties back to us talking a couple of weeks ago about John Wagner as well, which
Mm,
is like, um, in the idea of something coming to an end, it like take a moment to be grateful for it having existed at all in the first place.
yeah.
Um, but catching back up with myself, the I I actually think of a lot of film directors too. You brought up Christopher Nolan, and I think of a lot of film directors, both American and British, in particular, who um, I think borrow quite a bit from visuals of 2080. Not even necessarily creation, to, like character creation, design, or environment design, or anything like that, but how things are framed. I
Mm,
think that it's there are a lot of, especially early 2000 AD, that it really is, figuratively and literally every frame a painting
mm,
sort of thing, where you can see the cinematic quality to it. It reads like a comic, but
mm,
you can so easily picture that as a moving picture.
yeah.
I think that there are tons of directors who have kind of also had that vision especially in sci-fi stories, especially in, you know, more, futuristic romps, let's say.
Mm, mm.
Yeah, I feel like there's plenty of directors who have clearly read their 2000 AD, their Judge Dredd.
Yeah, well, and I've been quite open about this, that I think, the linchpin for so much of it is Wagner,
Yeah.
because and specifically Wagner and Grant,
Mhm.
the tone of their comics, of their writing, that blend of, comedy, uh, violence, ultra violence when applied properly, moments of incredible pathos, balance
Mhm.
against, ridiculous over the top things. I think John Wagner infected the rest of comics with that in a way
Yeah.
that no one has really ever acknowledged, and they have then gone on to infect everybody else with that. So
Yes.
this is the world that John Wagner built.
Aw, that's actually really sweet when you when you say it like that.
I just think so much about his voice, and really, just the word John Wagner and Alan Grant. It's important to make sure that you always understand that they were at their strongest when they were writing together. Like, not
Yeah,
to say
yeah.
that they were weaker when they weren't working together,
We all
but
know what you're saying.
yeah, um, because you can just see, once you notice it, you see it everywhere.
Yeah.
And I think that's what we'd be missing if 2000 AD had never existed. Is
Mhm.
not necessarily direct causality between things,
Mhm.
but just the tone of how people
The
write.
spirit of it.
Yeah, the spirit of 2000 AD just infected. We are all haunted by the spirit of 2000 AD.
Oh,
That's
glad to be part of the hive mind on this one.
so really, thank you to Pat Mills, John Wagner, Alan Grant, Kelvin Gosnell, Steve McManus. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. Hundreds and hundreds of creators who,
Yeah.
uh, you know, built this thing and have ensured that it continues. And I've had a job out of it, which is quite nice, for the past 15 years.
I was gonna say, actually, if 2080 hadn't existed, we wouldn't have jobs.
Well, exactly, exactly. We'd never have met.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, 31st of January, I believe, is my 15th anniversary.
Really?
Yeah.
Aw.
Yeah, yeah.
Aw. See,
Ma
this ended up actually being, like, a really, like, softy sentimental episode, like, completely on accident. We came in hot, and it ended up being very, very, very
Yeah, yeah.
nice.
Yeah, it's
Aw.
wonderful, wonderful. Well,
Aw.
thank Grud for 2000 AD and Tharg the Mighty.
Exactly.
But yes,
Be grateful,
yeah,
fuckers.
we should draw this conversation to a close. But do let us know what you think, Earthlets, in the comments, as I'm sure you will. Um,
Yeah.
what would the world look like if 2000 AD had never existed?
I'm curious to see if anybody has some like really wild speculation that we hadn't considered.
Oh yeah, I'm sure. I'm
Yeah.
sure they have. I'm sure they have. So we look forward to reading those. We should be back in 7 days' time for more from the greatest Galaxy's Greatest Podcast Show. Again, if you want to get in touch, if you want to tell us what your thoughts are on any particular themes, or you have a theme that you would like to suggest, thrill mail, not thrill mail. Good God, Michael. Thrillcast, all one word, at 2000ad.com. Please do get in touch. In the meantime, we should be back for more of this.
Yes.
We might even talk about the prog. Who knows?
Oh God, we'll see. Coin toss. It's fine.
But until then, Earthlets, it's goodbye from me. It's goodbye from Chloe. It's Blundig Verthwig.
See you next week.
Get 2000 AD now. Get